This is Green Street, the Environmental Health Show, greenstreetnews.org, Patty and Doug Wood, and our worldwide network of experts here every week to help you navigate your way through this increasingly toxic world. Welcome back. In a few weeks, our kids will be heading back to school to spend a good part of their early lives in classrooms and on school grounds. Today on Green Street, we're going to be talking about some of the most common environmental exposures that occur in schools and how those exposures can be mitigated or even eliminated in a program we've developed called the ChildSafe School. So if you are or know a parent of a young child or know a teacher or school board member or principal or superintendent, please share this program with them. We have 54 million school-age children in this country, and they spend a lot of time in classrooms and other school facilities. This is at a time when their bodies are just developing, a critical window of development when environmental exposures can do maximum damage, when chemicals used in schools can find their way into tiny bodies and begin their troubling work. On today's show, we're going to be talking about some of the most common exposures that occur at schools and how they can be mitigated or even eliminated with a science-based program called the ChildSafe School. On the web at www.thechildsafeschool.org, the program is filled with scientific studies, policy ideas, videos, and other information that can help school boards, administrators, and facility directors make their schools as environmentally safe as they can be. The program was developed by our nonprofit Grassroots Environmental Education, and it all begins with the unique vulnerability of children. All right, Patty, so let's start with this. Why is it so important that schools are a safe place for kids?
Well, when you think of the amount of time that children spend in school, starting in kindergarten and going through 12th grade, it's about half of their waking hours during the school year.
It's a big part of their life.
It's a big part of their life.
Yeah.
And if that school environment has what we call chronic low-level exposures to certain chemicals that are found in cleaning products or pesticides or fragrances, there are things that are just used typically in a classroom on whiteboards and so on.
Markers. There's all kinds of chemicals. When you think about it, there's a lot of exposures in
Exactly.
schools.
And floors in schools are cleaned with really toxic chemicals and also sealed with toxic chemicals. And
you know what a school smells like when you walk in.
Yeah, you know what that school smells like, especially in the summer when they're doing all the floors, especially the gymnasiums and so on. They're pretty stinky. Yeah. So a child spends all this time in school, and they are typically putting their heads down on desks, lying on the story hour carpet, where they have been tracking pesticides in from outdoors on the bottoms of their shoes from playing in gym or recess outdoors.
And kids sprawl on the floor in school.
And they sprawl on the floor all the time.
Sure.
And, they put things down on their desks and they pick them up and they, put them in their mouths. Yeah. I remember when we did a video of a school classroom just to see how many children had this typical hand-to-mouth behavior. And it was actually a second grade classroom. And we thought, well, probably a few of the kids will do that. Every single child in that classroom of 23 kids had this typical hand-to-mouth behavior going on for the entire time we were there.
Yeah.
They touch things and then they put their hands in their mouth, they put things in their noses, they wipe their eyes.
And they're not washing their hands.
They're not washing their hands. Yeah. They're touching things, picking things up off the floor.
Sure.
And so on. And then they have their snack, right? And so typically they're not all going and washing their hands before their snack, except if they have a very good teacher.
Or if they're in art classroom, sometimes after you've been using art materials, you wash your hands, but it's not typical.
But these types of exposures seem pretty innocuous. We all know what a school smells like. We all know that they're cleaning those schools every single day. Yeah. Unlike your home, right, where you're not spraying disinfecting products and you're not spraying all-purpose cleaners all over every surface every single day in your home.
Right.
That is happening in a school environment.
So it's like an occupational exposure for adults.
Absolutely.
Right? A workplace exposure where we have OSHA, right, that looks over.
Right.
So who's looking over the exposures in schools?
That's a good question. We've been in touch with the national organizations and with some of the PTAs in states around the country, and they are concerned to the point where they are looking at possible regulations about what kinds of products they can use in schools.
But this would vary from state to state, right? Because
Absolutely.
education is a state matter.
Yes.
So whatever that particular state decides to do, it's just for that state.
That's right.
The
And
kids
there
over
is a state ed department in every state.
Yeah.
And they look at everything. They're really the overseers of the school environments, indoors and outdoors.
Okay, so you mentioned cleaning products as being a significant kind of potential exposure. So let's talk a little bit about cleaning products. What are they using, and what's your concern about them?
Well, as I just mentioned, there are cleaning products being used every single day. So let's just talk about what we know. We know that environmentally mediated illness is a growing and yet preventable public health threat.
When you say environmentally mediated, we're talking about environmentally caused.
That's right.
Okay.
Exactly. So emerging science has linked many of these illnesses with exposure to chemical toxins, which has then precipitated this increased interest in schools and other facilities where children spend time. Children also spend a lot of time in daycare centers and in pre-Ks and in nursery schools and so on.
Sure.
Okay. So why are children at greater risk from exposure? Because they have immature and rapidly developing physiology, and they have these natural behavioral patterns that adults do not. Okay, they live in their environment the way adults do not either. They sprawl on floors, they play, they have their heads down on table surfaces, they engage in this hand-to-mouth behavior, et cetera, et cetera.
They get into it.
That's right, they get into it. And that's what children do.
That's what they're supposed to do.
That's how they're supposed to learn
Sure.
about their environments. They learn about their environments through their senses, right? They want to taste, they want to smell, they want to touch, and all of this is going on all the time, especially with the younger children.
Sure.
So pound for pound, children will take in more contaminants than adults. That increases their risk. So researchers have found that early exposures to environmental toxins are more likely to produce chronic disease than similar exposures encountered later in life.
This is so important.
You know, when you have a rapidly developing body and a lot of cell division going on, and there's some kind of an interruption in that normal developmental process, that could spell trouble.
You're setting the stage for problems later in life.
That's right. And studies also show that a developing fetus, of course, this is the most vulnerable, right? They are particularly at risk from the maternal exposures to certain chemicals. And this is really a concern for pregnant women who work in schools.
A lot of teachers.
And there are a lot of young women right out of, their master's degree in education who are working in public
Elementary
schools
sure.
who are working in schools.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And they get married and they have children. And so you find, it's pretty common in schools that you would have pregnant women working as teachers. And also, as we said, most schools and child care facilities are cleaned every single day, and they leave behind these fresh residues of cleaning chemicals on the surfaces, which we know children come into direct contact.
So what's in these products that you're worried about? What kinds of things?
Well, some of the chemicals found in cleaning products become airborne too, and when used, they can trigger asthma attacks and possibly even contribute to the onset of the disease. So they use disinfectants, and they're particularly harmful. These are known as quats, quaternary ammonium compounds, chlorine-based products like Clorox and so on, and triclosan, which is in a lot of things. These are all disinfectants that are really quite toxic.
Well, I think a lot of, they're antimicrobial, right? So that's their selling point is, we're going to get rid of the antimicrobial.
I know. During COVID, there was just an unbelievable increase in the use of disinfectants.
Understandably.
Yeah.
But in the process of getting rid of the microbes, you're creating another potential danger for kids.
Right?
Another
health risk.
Yeah. So how are kids in a typical classroom exposed to these chemicals?
Well, we just talked about, direct contact.
Right.
Okay, so that would be skin absorption.
Right.
Right, direct contact, skin absorption, then inhalation, accidental ingestion when they're touching everything and then they have their snack or they eat their lunch and so on and they haven't washed their hands first. So these health impacts from cleaning products can result from either acute or chronic exposure. We're really concerned about the chronic low-level exposures. Yeah. Chronic exposures can lead to asthma, allergies, certain types of cancer, learning and behavioral disorders, endocrine disruption, chemical sensitivity, kidney and liver damage. All the chemicals that are used in cleaning products and in products that we find in schools can lead to
disease in the future.
That's exactly right.
So we have chemicals that we're using in cleaning products in schools that we know are linked to the development of cancer?
There are some chemicals that we know are carcinogens that are in products.
And we're using these in schools.
Yeah, but we're working on this. But I just have to mention fragrances, because we talked about what a school smells like, right?
Yeah,
Everybody knows that smell.
Right.
Right, but fragrances are particularly problematic. Fragrances can be made up of more than 100 different chemicals to mimic something like rose or lemon or whatever. They're not really using real roses and real lemon. They're using a chemical mixture to make a particular scent.
They even call it lemon fresh.
I know.
It smells lemon fresh. That shows you the power of advertising.
Exactly.
Wow.
Okay, but parents and school administrators should be aware that their decisions in this area, in other words, purchasing, right?
Yeah.
Purchasing cleaning products may have profound impacts on the health and well-being of students, and not only students, but school employees as well as teachers.
Okay, so what are people supposed to do?
Well, we have a program in New York State where we have advanced the use of bio-based cleaning products. This was actually an executive order.
Bio-based as opposed to petrochemical-based, right?
That's correct. Bio-based products have many fewer health problems associated with them. I mean, bio-based cleaning products are made from minerals, forestry, and marine products, plant, and so, they come from nature, right? And then they're used, and then they go back to nature when they go down the drain without harming anybody along the way.
Yeah.
And so that was the main takeaway from the work that was done in New York State for cleaning products in schools.
So bio-based cleaning products is what we want to use.
Correct.
And not use petrochemical-based cleaning products.
That's right.
But, people get used to what they're...
I know. And they get used to the smell.
They get used to the smell.
That's right, that artificial fragrance.
And they've got their, the custodial staff has their standard order.
And they have
by
their
the
suppliers.
Case. Yeah.
And that's right.
So it's tough to change that. So do you have specific recommendations on the ChildSafe School website?
The ChildSafe School website has specific recommendations for product manufacturers that provide bio-based cleaning products.
Okay, cool. All right, well, I want to talk about diesel exhaust for a second, because diesel exhaust is a problem at a lot of schools. This is a very common sight where you've got school buses lined up at school, one behind the other, and their engines are running. And kids are getting on the buses. This mostly happens after school, where you've got this line of buses all in a row, and the kids are coming out and they're getting on the buses. And, the tailpipe of one bus is right by the door
of the bus behind it. Exactly. You're filling the cabin of that bus behind it with diesel exhaust fumes, right?
Yeah. So, little Johnny gets on the bus to go home, and he's been fine all day, and he comes home and he's got a bad headache.
Right.
Every day.
Right.
And his mother's going, well, what's going on? Well, John Wargo at Yale University actually put an air monitor on a kid and sent him out for the day.
It was actually his daughter.
Was it? Well, and she came back, and they took that monitor to the lab at Yale, and they looked at the exposures. And
the timing.
There's exposures throughout the day, but at the end of the day, there's this giant spike.
Right.
And they're looking at, what the heck is that?
She got on the bus.
She got on the bus.
Right.
Full of this diesel
typical.
exhaust.
Just look at a school building at around 3:30 in the afternoon, whenever they let the kids out.
Right.
And you'll see this line of buses, and they just sit there idling.
So there is no safe level to exposure to diesel exhaust.
I know.
Okay?
I know.
Diesel exhaust is a proven cause of both asthma and lung cancer, and it's been linked to an increase in breast cancer because of the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, a word that I was taught by
PAHs.
Dr. Frederica Pereira, who did a lot of study on PAHs in New York City and their effect on people.
She was at Columbia.
She was great. Anyway, so we've got acute symptoms like headaches, dizziness, nausea, and then we've got chronic exposures, long-term exposures like lung cancer.
I know.
So again, we've got something we know causes cancer, and we're exposing kids to it in schools. We could fix this. This is such an easy one to fix, okay?
Right.
This is a risk for not only for the kids, but it's a risk for the teachers, the staff, anybody that's around.
And the bus drivers.
And the bus drivers.
Of course.
Now, some states have laws that limit the time on idling, but, try to enforce that, 3-minute idling. Who's out there with a stopwatch?
Nobody.
Nobody. So
and in the winter, it's also problematic because
the drivers want to stay warm.
The drivers want to stay warm, and they want to keep the bus warm for the kids. Frankly, the kids are all dressed to go home, so they've got on their coats and their hats and their gloves and everything. They're all dressed, so they don't need to have a warm bus to get on.
Exactly. So this is a problem we can solve. On the ChildSafe School website, we've got sample signs. Really, it's just a matter of putting up signs at the school.
Right.
This is an idling-free zone. Turn off your engines.
Right. We did get state ed behind this initiative.
We did.
And so there are a lot of schools that I know of that have these signs which says no idling zone, turn off engines.
Yeah, I think a lot of schools have gotten the message.
Right.
One of the most effective ways we had was when we talked to the school bus monitors, linking the PAHs to increased risk of breast cancer.
Right.
And I remember we were making a movie about this, and I was waiting for the buses to come in, and turn off their engines. I had my camera set up right in front of where the bus was going to come in. So the bus comes in, and I'm waiting for him to turn off his engine, and he doesn't. And he's sitting there with the engine idling. And this, school monitor's mom comes racing, banging on the door. Shut your engine off.
Right.
Because she knew of the links to breast cancer.
And kids, as we know, kids are more vulnerable than adults to everything, including the exhaust from
Anyway,
diesel
this is
engines.
something you can do with a school policy, and I just want to mention that we have a sample school policy ready to go. All you need to do literally is print the thing off the ChildSafe School website and put in the name of your school and take it to your school board and say, can we have this policy?
Pass this policy?
The other thing that we found useful was for the bus drivers to have a sign on their dashboard.
Right.
That says,
just remind them.
Yeah, the Smithtown School District has a policy, no idling at schools, please turn off your engines.
Right. These are simple things, and they don't cost a school district a penny.
Zero.
Nobody.
Well, you got to get the signs, so a couple of $100 for signs. But
I'll
it's
pay
not,
for them.
Yeah, it's not something. Be careful now, Patty.
Okay.
We got a lot of people listening to the show. You don't want to volunteer. Anyway, this is a problem we could take care of.
Yeah.
So anyway, all right, let's turn to turf pesticides, if you don't mind, and talk a little bit about these playing fields that are using turf pesticides and they're dangerous for kids.
Well, we can just talk about kids just the way we talked about them as far as cleaning products are concerned, because children are uniquely vulnerable to any toxic exposure because of their rapidly developing bodies and typical behavior and so on. And this is really important when you're talking about being outside on the grass, right, at a school. So studies have shown that lawn pesticides can easily find their way into the school.
They call it translocation, right? When you're moving a toxin from one place to another. Kids are out on the field, they're running around with their sneakers, they come right into the classroom.
Back into their classrooms, where in many cases, especially in elementary schools, they have like a little story hour where they have a little carpet in the corner of the classroom, and the kids come in and they, with their shoes, and they sit in the story hour. Then they lie on that carpet and they have stories read to them and blah, 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 blah. And so they actually accumulate in carpeting and in dust. Pesticides are designed to break down outdoors in sunlight and in rain and in soil microbial activity.
Right.
Okay, but they can remain active inside a school classroom for months. I mean, active.
Yeah,
so we have pesticides that are a risk for a long period of time inside a classroom that should never be inside a classroom, right? And they should never be on those lawns outside either.
Yeah, not to mention, when the kids are outside, they're rolling in the grass.
Right.
That's what kids do. They're sitting on the grass. Even older kids are sitting on the grass doing their homework. If there are pesticides on that grass, they're getting it through their skin, right?
That's right.
Thermal absorption.
That's right. But you should also teach children about those flags, and they even use them at schools because schools
pesticide
can
warning flags.
That's right, the pesticide warning flags.
Yeah.
Which basically says, stay off this lawn.
Right.
Right. And why do you think that flag is there? Because those pesticides are dangerous.
Yeah.
So we are really focusing in the ChildSafe School on turf pesticides or lawn pesticides, right? We're not focusing on pesticides that are being used for structural damage, like for termites and so on. And we're not focusing on pesticides that are used in food preparation areas like the kitchens in the schools.
Right. A lot of that is health department stuff
That's
where you
health
have to
department
use
stuff,
it.
and they're concerned about roaches and so on and so on. Kids are not playing underneath the refrigerators or the stoves in a school kitchen.
Right.
So I am worried about them on the grass, and that's what we focus on at the ChildSafe School, because they spend a lot of time outdoors during recess, after lunch, during gym. They're outdoors a lot, and if your school is using pesticides on that lawn, that's a real exposure issue.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out, a lot of people say, well, they're registered with the EPA, so they must
Doesn't
be
mean
safe.
anything.
A registration with the EPA for a pesticide does not mean that it's safe, or that the EPA has done any testing.
Or that the EPA has approved it. All they've done is they've taken the research that was done by the pesticide manufacturer themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, and they take that research, they look at it, and they say, okay, here's your stamp.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to give you a CAS number.
Yeah.
And you get that number, and you're ready to go.
Yeah. So you've registered it with the EPA.
Basically, it's registered, but it doesn't mean that the EPA...
Yeah, we had this discussion. We went to the EPA and kind of challenged them on this about why they're allowing children to be exposed to these things. And I remember the guy sat behind the desk and said, they are...
As long as they follow the label.
Yeah, they're safe when used as directed.
Yeah, that's
and I
right.
kept saying, but these are kids and they're different from adults. And he
Right.
said, they're safe when used as directed.
I remember
said,
that.
but this is not, these things can be really dangerous for kids to be exposed to. They're safe when used as directed. He said, like a little machine,
Right.
just the same statement over and over.
and over.
So I'll just mention that on the ChildSafe School website, we've got a Q&A about turf pesticides. In fact, we have Q&A about all these subjects we've been talking about. We have science abstracts about pesticides and how they're harmful to kids. We have a sample no pesticides policy that
For a
any
school board, yeah.
any school board can adopt. And we have links to some professional training for groundskeepers so they can learn how to maintain beautiful property without using pesticides. All that on the ChildSafe School website. And again, that website is www.thechildsafeschool.org. That's going to do it for our show this week. On next week's show, we'll cover a few other environmental hazards that happen at schools, including LED lighting and artificial turf. So don't forget to tune in for that. Thanks to all of you who listen to and support this show. We really appreciate it. Patty and I will be back next week with another edition of Green Street. Thanks for listening.